When the parents of 18-year-old Kimberly Proctor transferred her to an alternative school to help with her anxiety, they had no idea they were leading their daughter to her slaughterhouse. Kimberly went missing in Vancouver, Canada, on the morning of March 18, 2010. Kimberly's mom last saw her in bed, where she kissed her goodbye, and then left for work. That afternoon, her mom called her cell phone repeatedly, but it was switched off. Kimberly used her phone constantly, so her mom knew she wouldn't let it go off. She called Kimberly's friends, but they all said they knew nothing about her whereabouts. That evening, she reported her daughter missing to the authorities. After a routine check, officers discovered no foul play and had nothing to go on with the investigation. However, time was running out. If she was in danger, they needed to act fast. Around 7 p.m. the next day, a group of men stumbled across something sinister under a bridge at Galloping Goose Trail. It was charred human remains. They put a call across to the police line to recover the remains. A few days later, dental records identified the burnt body as that of Kimberly Proctor. All hope to find her hale and hearty was lost. The autopsy showed she died of asphyxiation, meaning she suffocated to death. It was ultimately ruled a homicide. More than 40 officers were deployed to track down this murderer and bring them to book. Investigators decided to focus on social media since the victim was a teenager. Individuals around this age would have a massive social media history that could lead them to the murderer. This plan was perfect, as they soon struck gold, leading them to the perpetrators. In this case, the platform that aided the breakthrough in the investigation was a game called World of Warcraft. This is the shocking case of Kimberly Proctor, who was assaulted and murdered by her supposed friends. Kimberly was born to Fred and Lucy Proctor on the 1st of January, 1992. Her father was a diesel mechanic, and her mother was a Walmart manager. Kimberly loved animals and preferred their company to even humans, so she had many pets, including lizards, rabbits, mice, and hamsters. She was exceptionally passionate about cats and even wore cat ears to school. However, she had a tough time at school as she was bullied. She kept to herself and often had panic attacks in hallways in the presence of other students. Her parents administered her medications, but the drugs kept her sedated and passive. They then decided to transfer her to Pacific Christian School in Victoria. It was a school that could instill knowledge in her while considering the anxiety she battled. There was a problem with the school, though. It accommodated children with violent tendencies, too. All students were taught in the same classroom, regardless of their conditions. Among these children with violent inhibitions were 16-year-old Cruz Hendrick Wellwood and 17-year-old Cameron Alexander Moffat, popularly called Cam. Cruz had a history of violence, sexual assault, and theft. There are reports that he had broken a student's nose and hit another on the head with a chain at his previous school. He was enrolled in the Pacific School after that. His father was also a convicted felon, sentenced to life imprisonment for raping and murdering a 16-year-old girl in 2001. On the other hand, Cam was diagnosed with ADHD and was sexually abused when he was 4 years old. He had trouble learning in school and barely passed 4 classes throughout. He often ran away from home at night by jumping out of his bedroom window. He also self-harmed by cutting himself and inflicted injuries on animals. On one occasion, he kicked his dog so hard that its paw broke. To worsen the situation, he refused to cooperate when he was offered medical and psychological help. He finally got expelled when he appeared in school with a box cutter and threatened his sister. He was then enrolled in Pacific Secondary as well. He and Cruz met during arts class in 5th grade. Both boys bonded over their defiant behavior. They began skipping school to surf porn and play World of Warcraft together. Their defiance escalated as they grew older. They started watching sadistic pornography and fantasized about rape and bondage. They also drank blood and other bodily fluids on some occasions. Their parents were not spared the horror either, as the boys were disrespectful and rebellious in their respective homes. Cruz would even post about his violent behavior on the internet. He posted a blog entry on WordPress titled "Early Warning Signs of a Serial Killer." The signs he stated included abandonment by a father figure, animal cruelty, and an interest in sadomasochist porn. He added, "The peculiar thing is I meet all 14 criteria. Apparently, though, meeting all criteria makes it unlikely for the subject to be a serial killer. I suppose only time will tell." This blog post turned out to be a premonition. Kimberly began associating with Cruz and Cam when she dated a friend of Cruz's named Zach. The relationship was short-lived, though, as Zach broke it off after a few months. Kimberly was distraught, and she sought solace with Cruz. The conversations she had with both Cruz and Cam were majorly online. Cam soon declared that he liked her. She told him, "Ah, thanks." She was more interested in Cruz. To her amusement, she and Cruz became closer. He even told her he felt he could reveal anything whenever he talked to her, but this was all a lie. He got closer to her because he intended to perform his sick sexual fantasies on her. On the 17th of March, Cruz asked Kimberly what she was doing the following day. She told him she had nothing to do until 3 p.m. when she had to babysit. He then apologized to her out of the blue. He said he was sorry for being mean towards her when Zach broke up with her and wanted to inform her that he was barely friends with him now. He did not stop there. He told her he needed to explain some things to her in person and invited her to hang out at his home on the following day. Unknown to her, he connected Cam to the call, and the latter listened to the entire conversation. Kimberly accepted the invite. After the call ended, the boys chatted about the conversation and their evil schemes. Cruz said, "I'm going to rip her nose ring and burn it." Then he sent another message that read, "Burn her flesh." Cam replied, "Why not keep her bound and alive?" Cruz, in turn, responded, "That's what I'm going to do, but I need to get her stoned first and possibly seduce her." On the morning of March 18th, 2010, Kim's mother kissed her goodbye, not knowing it would be the last time she would see her daughter alive. Her mother assumed Kim would be home all day since she had no class. All she had to do for the day was babysit at 3 p.m., but Kim had other plans she didn't reveal to her mom. Immediately after her mom left home, she jumped out of bed and took a bus to meet Cruz. On arriving at her destination, she discovered that Cruz appeared with Cam, but she did not complain about the agreement. The trio headed to Cruz's home. Shortly after arriving at the residence, Cruz stated, "I think I'm going to make some KD." KD is an abbreviation used by Canadians for Kraft Macaroni and Cheese Dinner. This was the code phrase they had agreed to earlier that morning to use whenever Cruz wanted to attack Kim. Both boys attacked her, kicking and hitting her repeatedly. They then tied her hands and ankles. Cruz stuffed a sock in her mouth and duct taped it. Both boys took turns raping and beating her for several hours. The boys had seen too many sadistic pornographies that they acted out on Kim. They stuffed garbage, including a 4-inch lollipop, into her genitalia and anus. The horror Kim experienced in her final moments alive was unimaginable. The boys went on to mutilate her body with a knife while she was still alive. Afterward, they moved her into a freezer in the garage and shut it. She suffocated to death in the freezer. Around this time, Cruz tried to create a fake alibi. He logged in on his computer and sent a message to Kim, asking if she was done babysitting. Meanwhile, she lay in his freezer, suffocating to death. He even replied to a friend's message during that time. The friend had asked him why he wasn't answering his messages despite being online. Cruz replied, "Sorry, the freezer was jumping around." Here he was probably referring to Kim, who might have been struggling to get out of the freezer. By this time, Kim had already been reported missing to the cops, but they still had no idea she was dead. After murdering Kim, Cam attempted to lure an ex-girlfriend of his to the scene, probably to kill her as well. Luckily, she declined and never showed up. The following morning, Cruz and Cam placed the body in a hockey bag. The boys then carried the bag and camping fuel they had purchased the day before to Galloping Goose Trail. They entered the woods in the area where they doused the bag with camping fuel, then set it on fire with Kim's remains in it. Cruz sent out a message from his phone while they were still at the location. This phone activity left a digital trail connecting him to the area at that particular time. After killing, setting ablaze, and dumping their friend, the pair went on to live their lives like nothing had happened. Cruz returned home to hang out with another girl he was dating. Cam was out having brunch with his mother and grandmother. Afterward, they had headed to a game store to get him a video game. This same evening, Kim's remains were uncovered at the Galloping Goose Trail area, and investigations started fully. Due to the circumstances of the case, the news spread quickly. It was on every social media platform and news channel. Cruz got excited by the publicity and could no longer keep his deeds to himself. 5 days after the murder, he decided to tell his online gamer girlfriend, who resided in Halifax, Nova Scotia. They usually converse on MSN, but he told her they should use World of Warcraft's message room instead. Cruz believed this chat would less likely be saved, in contrast to the conventional message platforms. He informed her about everything he did to Kim and sent her links to articles about the case to back up the story. She asked him, "What about your family and friends and all whose lives you have ruined?" He responded, "No, I don't feel bad for them." Both Cruz and Cam felt no remorse and had no sympathy for Kim. Days after the murder, they conversed about getting away with it repeatedly. Cam even suggested they kill again. He said to Cruz, "Since we killed that bitch and it wasn't too hard, we should do it again." They displayed the same unsympathetic behavior in school. A friend of Kim's, Samantha, had overheard him talking about Kim's death, and she instructed him to desist from it because it was too painful to bear. He shouted at her, "No one fucking cares. She's dead. Who gives a shit?" Another student reported that Cruz had said to him, "I'm glad she's dead. I hated her." Even a stranger would not say such about a young girl who was murdered, not to talk of an acquaintance or friend. It was shocking to the students, but they were in for a much bigger shock when they heard he had a hand in her death and the details of the horrific things the boys did before she died of suffocation. Considering the controversies surrounding the boys on their possible involvement in the murder, they were taken in for questioning by cops. They admitted to meeting with her that morning to hang out, but lied that she departed for school after a while. It was clear that Kim had nothing to do at school that day, so detectives did not believe a word that the boys said. The police then bugged the boys' respective houses, cell phones, and even an area where they usually sit to discuss at a park. They also retrieved the boys' internet and chat history. Ultimately, they accumulated damning pieces of evidence from this chat history to nail the boys once and for all. They were arrested on the 18th of June, 2010, exactly 3 months after they sexually assaulted and murdered Kimberly. The boys were interviewed and they showed no remorse whatsoever. According to the cops, they were really calm. In October, they both pled guilty to first-degree murder and indignity to human remains. Cruz was diagnosed as a sexual sadist, meaning he derived sexual pleasure from inflicting pain on others. Also, he had strong psychopathic traits of necrophilia, a sexual attraction to corpses. Cam was diagnosed with conduct disorder as a kid, including defiance and antisocial behavior. They also ruled that he had a tendency towards sexual defiance. Both boys were said to be at a high risk of committing violent and sexual crimes again. The psychological results also reported that there was only a slim chance that they could be rehabilitated. Both boys were tried as adults and sentenced to life imprisonment with the possibility of parole after 10 years. The judge also lifted the publication ban that protected their identities as Kim's killers, which was initially instituted because they were minors. They were also sentenced to 5 years in prison for the charges of indignity to human remains, which would run concurrently with the other sentence. The teen boys would also have their DNA samples taken for record in the system, and a 10-year firearms probation was enforced. On the 15th of May, 2020, Cruz applied for a hearing to determine if he would be granted parole since he had already spent a minimum of 10 years in prison. The psychologist who examined him reported that they could not see a scenario where Cruz could be allowed to roam the community without supervision. It was also added that there had been a lack of improvement in him despite completing the high-intensity sex offender program. Likewise, the report revealed that he had ongoing psychopathic traits. In August, the parole hearing board turned down his request. However, he will be eligible for another parole hearing after 5 years. Kimberly had her whole life ahead of her. The day before her brutal murder, she had just discovered that she had enough credits to graduate from high school. The family was excited. Her mother had volunteered to join her in sewing her dress for her graduation. Kimberly had also prepared ahead for the aftermath of high school. She planned to volunteer at a local wild animal rehabilitation center because of her passion for animals. Sadly, she never realized any of these dreams before she was viciously murdered by people who posed as her friends.